Hi, I'm Izzy, and this is Dizzy Quilts and Sews. In today's video, we are kicking off my quilt along. Now, if you are a garment sewer who would like to dip their toes into quilting, this is the quilt along for you. It's going to be a very slow-paced, easy quilt to put together, but we're going to use some really cool techniques. So if you're a seasoned quilter, there might be some things in there for you as well. So the goal of this quilt along is to basically make a baby quilt or a 40-inch square quilt. You can use it as a table topper, as a wall hanging, as a baby quilt. You decide what you want to make with your finished quilt. We are going to be quilting together for about 9 months. I'm going to release videos every 3 weeks, and I'll take you through the making of this quilt step by step. So we are going to piece together, we're going to quilt together, then sew on the binding, and even make a label. The format of this quilt, or the design of the quilt, is based on very traditional quilt blocks. I did not design any of this. I don't claim to have invented anything. If you Google traditional quilt blocks, there's a ton of them out there on the internet. So we are going to piece traditional blocks, but once the block is pieced, we are going to make a quilt sandwich and quilt that block right away. And at the end, once we have our 9 blocks pieced and quilted, will we assemble our top. So it's basically referred to as the quilt as you go method, which is really nice because it avoids you having to stuff a larger quilt under your needle, which can be challenging for a beginner. So 9 blocks, you're going to learn some cutting techniques. I'm going to give you tips and tricks on piecing an accurate 1/4-inch seam allowance. We're going to learn different building blocks to put together our quilt blocks. We are also going to be quilting these blocks, so you're going to learn 9 different motifs to quilt your blocks. We're going to use the walking foot for some of them and the free motion foot for others. And at the end of it, you will have learned a ton of techniques new to you if you're new to quilting. But, this could be a very relaxing, slow-paced quilt along if you're a seasoned quilter as well. Now, I don't have the finished quilt to show you because I'll be making my quilt with you, but I have put together some test blocks, and this is the size of the block. So this is 12.5 by 12.5. So they're fairly big blocks, which will be great for practicing your quilting skills on, but also they're not as finicky or tedious as, for example, piecing a 6-inch block would be. So I think 12 by 12 is a really nice size, and then you only need 9 of them to make a 40-inch square quilt, which is kind of cool. You will need a few basic tools to put this quilt together, and I'm going to list everything you need in the description box below, but I'm going to quickly go through this together. So the first thing is you'll obviously need fabric. You'll need a background fabric. So the background fabric is the fabric, in this example here, it's the gray fabric. So it's basically what stands behind or in the background and allows the block or the colors you chose for your blocks to really pop on top of your quilt. I'm going to be using a gray solid fabric for my background. This is Kona Dove. It's a very light gray fabric, so it will allow all of my colors to really pop. For my blocks, I chose a bunch of fat quarters from my stash, all in shades of blue. So you'll see I have very dark blues, I have light blues, and then I have some medium shades of blue. You want contrast between your colors and your background fabric. That's what's really going to allow your block or the design to really, really pop. You can go full on scrappy with this. You can use leftovers from woven garments. This needs to be woven fabric. You can use fat quarters like I'm doing, or you can use quilting cotton scraps. It's up to you. Some of the pieces you'll need are fairly small, others are fairly large, so keep that in mind. You're going to want a nice variety of sizes if you are using scraps. And again, you want to use fabric that's going to go well together, so all of your colors will blend nicely, but also you want them to contrast with your background fabric. Next, you're going to need some backing fabric, and you're going to need about, oh my gosh, at least 2 yards or 2 meters of a backing fabric. And I chose this cotton that I had in my stash. It's a pretty neutral, so it's going to go with everything on the front of my quilt. I already pre-cut these to 14 inches square because, like I said, we're going to be quilting each block as we go. So if you want to do that, I will show you how to do that in the next video. But if you want to prep ahead of time, you can take your backing fabric and cut it into 9 14-inch squares. And that way you'll be ready to start quilting with us. Out of your backing fabric, you're also going to need 1.5-inch strips for when we go to assemble our top. So make sure you've got leftovers of your backing fabric after you've cut your 14-inch squares. And then the last piece of fabric you'll need is a binding fabric. You'll need about 1/3 of a yard for your binding fabric. You can also use scraps and just stitch together 2.5 strips of fabric. And as long as you have about 175 inches of binding, you should be fine. So that's it for the fabric. So background fabric, oh, I forgot to say how much. Your background fabric, you need about 1 yard, just to be safe and in case you mess up. For your colors, you can go as many or as little colors as you want. I would suggest at least 2 different fabrics for your colors. Have a nice variety of fat quarters. I think most of us have a small stash of fat quarters. Pull out at least 7 to 8. You may not need all of them, but that will give you more options when it comes to piecing your blocks. And that is it for fabrics. All right, now let's talk about the tools you're going to need. Now you're not going to need that many. If you're brand new to quilting and you're really just giving this a try, don't go out and buy a ton of things. You don't need to do that, or buy very expensive things. I'm going to link down below to inexpensive tools you can buy. I'm not affiliated with anything, so if you do decide to buy, there's absolutely nothing in it for me. Just trying to be helpful and point you to a place where you can get some of these tools if you don't already have them. So besides the, sewing machine, of course, you'll need a sewing machine and some thread. I would suggest some neutral thread for your piecing so that it blends into all of the different fabrics you pick. You'll also need a pretty neutral thread for the quilting. Now I used to use cotton thread for quilting, but recently my sewing machine decided it didn't enjoy quilting with cotton anymore. So now I use polyester, especially for the free motion quilting. When you're going really, really quick, the cotton thread tends to shred and break. So polyester thread is fine for both the piecing and the quilting. All right, Bear is on my table, so I'm kind of keeping an eye on him. All right, other tools you're going to need. You're going to need a rotary cutter. Now, this is the one I use and I like. This is a 45 millimeter blade, perfect for cutting quilting cotton. You can use a smaller one if you have one. That's the one I like. You're going to need a rotary mat or a cutting mat, obviously. Pick one that has 1 inches or a grid in inches. You don't need a huge one. Just a standard cutting mat will be fine. Keep in mind that you may need to cut yardage. So yeah, so your rotary cutter and your mat. Next, you're gonna need some rulers. Now you don't need a ton of them, and you know, if you're new to quilting, you might see a bunch of like specialty rulers and this and that. Really, you need 2 rulers to get started. You need a large quilting ruler that's 6 inches by 24 inches. That's the one I have. It's an Omni Grid. I've had this for years and it's still going strong. So one of these will make cutting yardage super easy. And when it's time to square up our 12-inch blocks, you can also use this. And then a smaller one. This is a 5.5-inch ruler I have, also an Omni Grid. I use this to square up some of my building blocks when I'm piecing blocks together. It's a lot easier to use a smaller ruler than that long 24-inch one. So if you can, get yourself a smaller ruler like this just for squaring up and trimming of our blocks. Next, you're going to need some marking tools. I really love this Dritz marker. There we go. It's got like a chalk in there. Any marking tool will do. We'll be marking on the back of the fabric, so you could even use a pen or a regular pencil if you want to. You're of course going to need snips and a seam ripper, just in case, you never know. You want to have pins for when we're putting our pieces together. I like long, thin pins with an easy to grab head. Because as you're sewing, you want to make sure you're able to quickly take your pins out before you get to them. And then you'll need 2 specialty feet if you don't already have them. The first one is a quilting foot, or a walking foot, I mean. This is what it looks like. This one goes on my Juki machine. Your machine may have come with one. Now, even if you're not sure you're going to get into quilting a lot, this is so useful to have in your sewing room. If you're a garment sewer, you can use this with knit fabrics, with bulky fabrics. Seriously, I strongly suggest you invest in one of these. Very good. And then the second foot is a darning foot or a free motion quilting foot. And this is what mine looks like. This is the one that goes on my Juki machine. You'll notice that the bottom is a circle like this. And this basically allows you to move the fabric under the foot freely. Free motion quilting, hence the name. If your machine didn't come with one, you can buy a universal free motion quilting foot, fairly inexpensive on things like Amazon. So if you think you're really going to enjoy quilting, I would suggest just grabbing one of the cheaper ones. And then if you really, really love it, then invest in one that's specific to your machine. But to get started, just buy one of the cheaper ones on like Amazon or something. And that's it. That is all you need. Again, I'm going to put the list of supplies down in the description below. And of course, if you have any questions about any of this, please leave them in the comments below. As well, in the description box is my email address. So if you'd rather email me directly, you can also do that. I try to answer all emails within 24 hours. One thing I completely forgot, which is really, really important, is batting. So you're going to need some batting, obviously, and your batting also needs to be cut at 14 inches square. So you can use batting scraps, like I have a ton of these strips of batting leftover from other projects. So you'll need 9 14-inch squares of batting for your quilt. Now I like poly cotton batting, so I think this is 80% cotton, 20% polyester batting. It's very thin and it's very easy to quilt with. So as a beginner, I would suggest you avoid the really fluffy or high loft polyester batting. That tends to get very bulky and it's, yeah, not the easiest thing to use. So just a cotton batting or a poly cotton batting, perfect for your first projects if you're new at this. All right, now that's it. That's really it in terms of supplies. All right, so gather your supplies, go and pick your fabrics, and get everything ready to start on January 28th. So on the 28th, we are going to be piecing our first block. We're going to be quilting it and putting everything together. I'm going to do this along with you and show you step by step what you need to do. All right, I really hope you decide to quilt along with me and that you enjoy the quilt along. But again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Thank you so much for watching. Please give the video a like on your way out if you liked it, and consider subscribing so that when new videos come out, you'll know right away. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.